So again, welcome to the Real World Applications of Design Thinking webinar. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Fernanda Correa. I'm a business development at Spring to Innovation, and I'll be helping out with the webinar today. We hope you get a lot of value out of the session and enjoy the content, whether you're watching this live or on demand. In today's webinar about real-world applications of design thinking, we hope you get insights into how to apply design thinking methodologies directly to your specific challenges and how it can enhance team collaboration and innovation. Today, we're privileged to have a special guest speaker, Stephanie Katz. She's Director, Program and Portfolio Management, Cloud Strategy and Stewardship, Hosted Service Branch in the Government of Canada. She's a trailblazing IT strategy and service delivery leader with a proven track record in both government and private sector. Renowned for her strategic insight in innovative leadership, she has led enterprise-wide transformations to modernize IT infrastructures and enhance service delivery. She champions agile methodologies, design thinking, and user-centered practices to revolutionize cloud service procurement and implementation. So welcome, Stephanie.
Thanks so much for having me.
And we'll also hear some insights from Nilofer Erdebil, founder and CEO of Spring to Innovation. She's a TEDx Ottawa speaker, author of the international best-selling book, Future Proofing by Design, and has dedicated her career to assisting organizations in achieving remarkable advancements through design thinking principles. So with that, I'll pass it over to Nilofer to begin today's discussion with Stephanie.
Thank you, Fernanda. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And thanks for those that are writing in the chat about where they're working and what types of projects that they're working on. We're actually going to get started with a poll for everybody, just so that we get a feeling of people's understanding as well. And so, Osa, if you don't mind putting up the poll. And of course, thank you, Stephanie, so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure talking with you.
Absolutely happy to be here.
And so the poll question that we are going to ask is, what's your level of familiarity with design thinking or human-centered design? And we're going to go from not a clue to I'm an expert. And so you might have heard of it, you might have tried it or parts of it, you might be using it all the time. Anything in between there is really good. So I'm going to give you guys probably about 20 more seconds to fill it in and let us know what your level of familiarity with design thinking or human-centered design is. It's really good. I think there's a lot of, I've heard of it and I've tried it or parts of it so far. Give you guys maybe 5 more seconds to finish off the poll. What's your level of familiarity with design thinking or human-centered design? And maybe we can end the poll and take a look at what our results are. And so about 13% not sure what it is, 37% I've heard of it, 30% I've tried it or parts of it, 15% use it all the time, and 4% are experts. So thank you so much, everybody, for sharing that with us. All right, and so if you don't mind going to the next slide, Osa. So the reason that we're chatting a lot about deeper clarity in our current work is it's actually a methodology that we've based off of design thinking. And for those that are familiar with design thinking, you might know the 5 phases of design thinking: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And as we've worked with organizations, we found that there's some parts that, if added on, make projects a lot more successful, especially at the start. If we take the time to align teams to the organization's mandate and to take the time to frame the challenge that they're looking to solve and then identify what success looks like, the likelihood that the design thinking portion of it is more successful is much higher. Next slide. And so for those that aren't familiar with deeper clarity, it is a methodology and a mindset for alignment and for success, and it incorporates the principles of design thinking, alignment, strategic foresight, and mindset into it. It's about creating clarity on things to make them lighter so that they're a lot easier to solve and take decisions on and implement. And it's about shifting and adapting and looking for possibilities and opportunities as well, things that we might not have seen before. So it's alignment within the team, it's understanding the customers, a willingness to reframe and to experiment early on so that as we're implementing it, we can also feel confident in what we're actually implementing it because we've actually done some experimentation. And then the other part, the strategic foresight, is about considering the different futures of it. And I know in our work with Stephanie, you guys have done a lot of that as well too, is thinking what the environment might look like in a year, 2 years, 5 years down the line. And all across this is the mindset component of it. What are the different types of mindsets you need to have throughout the project life cycle? And especially making sure that we're looking at things from an end user mindset as well too. And if you've heard me talk before, I love talking about it as aligning and understanding the shared goals and what shared success looks like. And that's the preparation for a project before we get into the connection and the discovery, understanding customers, reframing the problem. And so defining what the problem is based on all the information that we've learned about the customer, and then doing some of the experimentation and implementation component of it. And for those that might not have used design thinking before and aren't sure where to implement it, there's so many different ways. And Stephanie's going to talk a little bit more about how she has applied it. For those that might not have applied it before, you can use it for innovation, especially if you're looking to create new projects, new services. It's a way to open up a different part of your mindset and open up new opportunities. It's could be used for customer experience. And so how do we make the experience for our end users a lot better? It could be internal or external to the organization. And it could be around employee experience. So what are some of the challenges that employees are having, and how can we take that into consideration as we're developing services internally for our employees? And one of my favorites is the digital transformation. As we're introducing new technologies, what is it that we're looking to have the technologies solve? And I think I've been hearing a lot about this in conjunction with AI as well too, is what is the challenge that we want to be solving before we even bring on the technology? Because at the end of the day, technology is just an enabler to have us solving the problems. And so with all of that being said, I'm super happy to welcome Stephanie, who's going to be chatting with us on how she's applied this methodology and the results that she's gotten from it, and some of the discoveries, some of the challenges, and her overall experience with it. So welcome, Stephanie.
Thanks, Nil, and thank you so much for bringing me on to join in this discussion. I'm really happy to be here with you all today. And talk a bit more on design thinking, and also to share my recent design thinking journey on a project that was pretty close to my heart, where we were able to apply an agile approach and design thinking principles and best practices. So through this discussion, I hope you can all take back, little nuggets from my experiences back to your own programs and projects. And I'm looking forward to diving in with you today.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Maybe we could start out with a bit of a description of what your role was as you started using design thinking and implementing it within your team.
Sure, sounds good. So my role at the time, just to put this into context, was Director of Strategy and Product Portfolio Management. And just to set the stage of where my design thinking journey began, it was really to find creative approaches to solve a very practical problem with my former contact center services business line. And our biggest problem at the time was to modernize our portfolio of service offerings under a multi-year modernization strategy. And with a scope of over 221 contact centers representing hundreds of unique business lines, delivering mission critical services to Canadians, our focus was really on, number one, ensuring service continuity for those services. So citizens would continue to get the services that they need. But then that second piece is kind of taking it to the next level and evolving our portfolio of offerings to more closely line up with vendor service offerings, and then also partner expectations as well, for those sort of modern, secure, best of breed services to support their program delivery out to Canadians. So in that role, my core function, I think, was to lead efforts to procure and manage that full stack public cloud contact center services. So solutions delivered by CSPs to really enable citizens to access those services through the channels of their choice. So whether it's voice, email, or chat. And it included the infrastructure platform, as well as the application layers, data management, BI analytics reporting, basically all of those pieces that kind of came together to deliver full public cloud contact center service.
That's amazing. And so basically from the time either a business or a citizen or even people outside of Canada are calling into the government of Canada to what happens in the back end, how it's being processed, synthesized, and decisions are made based on that data as well too.
Exactly.
That's phenomenal. So that being said, as you were working on the project, it was quite a large scope as well too. Can you describe a little bit about the project scope itself and the approach you guys took and some of the experience that you had during the project?
Absolutely. And I think we should probably start with, drivers, because there were a couple key drivers that were really putting pressure on this project. Externally, what we were up against was market pressures. So market pressures were mounting as our service providers were sort of moving away from traditional private cloud hosting environments, and we're starting to increase their financial and resource investments in public cloud delivery models. So our biggest challenge here internally and externally, I'd say, was we really needed to adjust our business models to accommodate the public cloud delivery, as our group was a bit more structured to support traditional managed services. And then internally, we were really driven by, having that ability to provide multiple service delivery models, so whether it was in-house or hosted or public cloud, to make sure that we had that sort of diversity of strengths in terms of the technologies to serve our partner needs and basically have them put on the best fit modern platform to meet those needs. So where I'd say, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just thinking where design thinking really comes into play here in terms of my approach and my team's approach to solving that very practical problem was really to sit down, leverage that combined public and private sector expertise of my teams, my cross-functional teams, to really look at how we can do things differently, because this did present an opportunity for us. To kind of use those drivers as an opportunity to introduce new creative approaches, including human-centered design thinking and agile as well, to the initial program from a procurement perspective, but also when it comes to service delivery. And throughout this process, I was really looking at SSC as a service provider and improving our value proposition to partners through this exercise. And so,
sorry, for those that aren't familiar with SSC or Shared Services Canada, it's basically internal to the federal government, and it helps the other departments procure technology solutions. Is that a fair way of describing that, Stephanie?
Exactly. We basically operate as the IT organization for the federal government. And so we manage IT services across, data centers, networks, telecom, et cetera, including the public cloud services.
And so what was your first step in bringing in design thinking into the project?
I'd say my first step was looking at, we asked ourselves some hard questions. We kind of sat down and said, how can we, change our traditional approach to engaging in procurements and apply more of that kind of iterative, collaborative, user-centric approach to vendor and partner engagements. So rethinking how do we better engage our users and our end users, which are Canadian citizens, our government partners, and our vendor community in this process to deliver best of breed service offerings. And so we needed to really get creative with this new, process modeling based on some of what we were hearing from partners in terms of, delivery times. So asking ourselves, how can we more efficiently get our services out to our partners? And what do we need to keep? What can we keep within our structure, and what do we need to change? And then also helping our partners. One of the other questions that had kind of come up was around financial. So helping, build up this holistic costing model that captures and controls TCO for partners to better be able to kind of manage and anticipate and plan for cloud costs. So understanding what's coming down from the partners in terms of their questions and concerns, and then how do we structure something that's going to work. But in terms of my approach and really like what it boils down to, we were asking ourselves some hard questions around where can SSE deliver practical business value in the cloud space? How do we play? How do we manage this? Where's that kind of line of delineation between what the vendor does and what our organization should do as a common service provider, as well as our partners? And then refocusing on treating our vendor engagements and our partner engagements as true partnerships and co-development to better serve our users. So just to get into that a little bit more, we were asking ourselves some questions around, who are our prime user groups on these solutions? And how can we, instead of, making a decision in a vacuum, bring them to the table more and leverage their expertise and their experience to co-develop our requirements? And it also had us shifting our focus, and I think you had mentioned this a little earlier in the discussion, but our focus away from purely technical capabilities and outcomes and objectives, which is really our comfort zone as an IT organization. So that was not easy, but to focusing more on business outcomes. And so how can we best build out, this common set of desired business outcomes that are going to meet our partners' needs, still having those baseline technical capabilities, and then let the vendors come to the table with solution offerings on how best to deliver technology to meet those needs within the framework, I'll say, of certain cost and scope constraints and parameters as those needs evolve over time. So those were some of the things that we were kind of thinking about in terms of the initial approach before we kind of dug into applying design thinking.
I love the strategy that you had. And when you talk about partners, it's other government departments like an RCMP, a CRA, or ESDC, or any of the major departments within the government of Canada. And so I loved how you not only used it to understand your partners, but also their customers at the end of the day. So not only the people that are procuring the technologies and the solutions, but also who's going to be using it, whether that might be agents or people that are calling in from citizens, from businesses to people outside of Canada as well too. So I loved how you guys used it all end to end.
Yeah, it was definitely a new take on the traditional process, and I'm so very happy that we kind of took this route just to dig a little bit deeper into the experience actually, and how we kind of practically took this approach and brought it down to earth. Is I really brought my teams together to look at how we can apply this to the entire each of the development phases. So from some of the initial, service structure and design, from a procurement perspective, to make sure that we can buy those, services to deliver on the development phase as well as delivery. And the procurement, I'll say, and just a little government disclaimer here, that this Agile project is no longer active. And the information I'll share is either publicly available or generalized. But essentially what we did here is we structured it as one common initiative intended for multiple large clients with complex service needs. And so we had multiple pre-qualified vendors compete through this down select process after they've demonstrated that they could meet certain baseline requirements. And then top 3 performing vendors would then proceed to stage 2, which was the POC or proof of concept phase for technical and financial evaluations. And this was really a collaborative, iterative process between our service line, between our very supportive procurement team, who was awesome, agile and design thinking experts to help us and support us and provide advice and guidance along the way, our GC partners and their SMEs who were now at the table, and the vendor community. And so these phases essentially would evolve over time as they progressed from the baseline technical and business capabilities, from the POCs, and then to the financials. And when it comes to design thinking concepts and tools, when we talk about collaborative iterative co-development of the procurement documents, this is something that we really took to heart. We empowered our partners to have a seat, not just in requirements gathering or let's have some discussions to understand your business, but at the decision-making table with SSC SMEs to co-create requirements and eventually assess solution capabilities before contract award to determine that best fit solution that would meet their specific business needs. We brought our service providers and our GC partners together through a series of increasingly productive engagements, really good discussions there, and provided a forum for a continuous feedback loop to basically consult our partners and our clients as this two-way street of mutual knowledge sharing expertise. And listening more deeply was one of the biggest things I think that we had taken out of this, was really listening more deeply to understand and apply their business and technical goals and their user needs and their end user needs, which they understood better than anybody else because they lived them day in, day out, into the procurement documents. So when we talk about insights, the insights we garnered from these discussions were really invaluable in providing opportunities to refine and adapt and adjust our initial assumptions to align with our partner needs and vendor capabilities to deliver.
Yeah, because it was a lot of mind shifting, not just for the team, for the partners, for the vendors, as well to everybody along the process.
Exactly. And there were a lot of benefits that came out of that. It really helped us build trust and better partnerships of mutual value between ourselves and our partners and our vendors, and changed our perspectives too, to your point, because we really took it an extra step to step into our partner's shoes as those frontline service providers and made sure that how we were structuring the service and how it was to be delivered and the procurement really reflected that along the way.
Yeah, and we're talking about all the great benefits around applying design thinking to your work environment, but there were also some challenges. Could you chat a little bit about some of the challenges in there?
Sure, absolutely. So there were many benefits. There were also, this program was not without its challenges. I think there were what we had experienced where there were some initial challenges helping partners through understanding this new process. So there was a little bit of legwork up front that was required to really help them understand how does this work? What does this process look like? What are the next steps along the way? How are you involved? And then really, how does this benefit you? And how are you going to get the results you're looking for in the end out of this versus the original process that you're more comfortable with? So really helping them through understanding that, the benefits, and getting their buy-in, I think was probably one of the initial challenges we experienced up front. And keep in mind, we were also working against tight time constraints as well. And there was this tendency to sort of revert back to that traditional familiar approach when things got a little ambiguous or unclear. So it took some time for us to work through that process up front and we did this through discussions, we did it through presentations of successful use cases or application of this method. a number of different engagements with partners to kind of talk them through that process and provide decks and docs to help them understand how this works and how this is advantageous for them. Sought their feedback, brought them in to the discussion and again the decision making, and applied their proposed changes up front with that sort of longer term benefit, I'd say, of less work downstream and improved results. So definitely some challenges there around that. But again, this is a repeatable process. So once you get, people on board, it's much easier to repeat and repeat and repeat.
Yeah, and I'd have to say that is common in organizations. The first time design thinking is being brought in, there's a lot of communication that has to be done up front, unless you've had the benefit of everyone in the organization having taken that training or talked to other people that have implemented design thinking, and it was better outcome, better results than they would have using traditional methodology. So that's super common to have when you're bringing new methodologies and mindsets into organizations. And I liked how you pointed out that if it's ambiguous, if you're getting into ambiguity or it's uncomfortable, people try to revert back to the old ways, even though they know it doesn't necessarily work. It's constantly making sure you're going back to the process, the methodology, the mindset component of it. And when you do, you have remarkable results.
Exactly.
Go
ahead.
I was going to say, I know you added a little bit about the results and the benefits, but overall, I think the top two benefits or results were from applying design thinking.
I think there were a number, but if I were to kind of whittle it down, from an SSC perspective and from a partner perspective, I'd say as well, the process really enabled us to talk through their business challenges and their objectives and their ongoing and planned transformations that we need to consider for integration. It allowed us to collaborate with a much broader scope of resources of end user groups when we walked through the use cases and the personas and the client journey mapping that we never would have had an opportunity to speak to if we had followed that more traditional process where we'd have, say, the CA, the TA, a couple SMEs in the room, feeding information back and forth to the partners, but not having them there at the table. So having those opportunities and facilitating those discussions with those end user groups to understand where are your pain points and what would make your life easier. And again, step into their shoes and build that into the process through the demos, through the POCs, making sure that their needs are being met, giving partners direct access into the technology to better understand those solutions and go in there and test those capabilities and validate how they meet their needs before A, committing and B, scaling, I think was a huge value add from both an SSC and partner perspective practically, but also from a relationship management perspective. And when we think about the vendors from a vendor perspective as well, this really opened the door, I'd say, for them to showcase what their solutions can do to SSC and partners. It was a bit of a deviation from, we'll say, the traditional static process where GC departments would kind of, or vendors actually would come present their fully baked, detailed requirements. This is dictating, I'll say, how solutions will function to meet the partner's needs. But this approach took a completely different tact and really considered our vendors as our partners, as collaborators to refine that content and focus on how their solutions will resolve our partners' business challenges to achieve specific outcomes. And so that was, again, some of this is common sense and some of this we've applied before. It's not necessarily new, but it was taking it to the next level and really gathering all those insights and those nuggets through these discussions and through a real, I'll say, tripartite co-partnership. We really, by adopting this approach, kind of paved the way for more efficient procurement process, more trust, stronger relationships between our partners and our vendors, more meaningful and valuable engagements, and then well-informed procurement decisions and really results that deliver solutions that meet our partners' needs in a flexible way, more flexible than before.
And I was fortunate enough to be in some of those sessions and hear the positive reactions of vendors too, as they were part of helping create the solutions or the possibilities as well too. And so I think that was super positive.
Absolutely.
And what were some of the lessons learned?
Lessons learned. There were many lessons learned, but what I think we learned, that I learned personally, and that my teams learned as well through this positive but challenging experience, I'd say, is that we can kind of, in our own little ways, push the boundaries of traditional thinking on service delivery and on procurements in this environment and build more of that innovation culture by demonstrating real practical business value and introducing design thinking and the agile approaches to our toolkit for delivery. I also learned a few new ways to get creative with our partners when bringing our experts to the table to co-collaborate with them, to learn from each other, to kind of test out our theories and assumptions against reality in a new way, and iterate and adjust until we get it right with our partners, who are then going to go out and operate these solutions for the next several years. And when it comes to my teams, I learned that it is possible to get, teams more comfortable with and embracing that ambiguity, and looking at applying our collective decades of experience to try something new, to be a beginner again, and that it's okay. And that my teams are supported when they take those risks to build something new and experiment in, I'll say, a very risk-averse environment. And the teams are very responsive with it, and they ran with it. And I think we take this into, our next project and our next project and our next roles as well, and just build and build from there. But definitely some good lessons that came out of this experience in those ways.
I love that. And I noticed some folks might have questions. Feel free to write comments in the chat. And if you have questions, we're going to spend 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. So feel free to write it in the Q&A section as well, too, if you have a question or comments in the comment section. And I know, Stephanie, you are in a new role now. And so what are some insights that you are taking forward as you're in your new role, or what are some of the insights and methodologies and mindsets that you're taking or have taken into the new role?
So it's still early days, but with such a large mandate, with complex changes that are coming down the pipe involving GC stakeholders across government, a lot of stakeholders at the table, basically the same concepts can be applied, but on a broader scale. Within, the department and within other departments, there are, I'll say, multiple leads covering different elements of operationalizing the strategy with short timelines to deliver. And so applying design thinking to kind of line up business needs across these stakeholder groups with their own priorities and their own interests and their own pain points and perspectives on how best to drive this forward. Applying that same concept to those engagements internally, applying that same concept to our engagements and discussions and decision-making through governance and portfolio and program management and all of our internal and external engagements, I think are some of the ways and the forums that can definitely exercise the lessons learned from design thinking. Coming to the table open-minded in those discussions, listening, co-developing with those groups, considering their perspectives and integrating them right into the planning process, and being creative, I think, was a big piece of the puzzle, is just being comfortable in the lack of clarity sometimes and ambiguity, and taking the risk to build from that and iterate and iterate and iterate until you get where you need to go through. So that's something that I think that sort of approach that I applied in that project definitely transitions well into this new role, but on a broader scope and scale.
I love what you said about allowing space for creativity and how you've been able to do that as well too, and the iteration component of it. So that's fantastic. And it's funny, I'm looking at some of the chat at the same time too. And so As you were interacting with your clients and within your team, how did you bring in the client into conversations, into starting to use design thinking? Was that a difficult process? And what are you thinking about it as you reflect back on that experience of bringing in the client?
Reflecting back on bringing in the clients, I'd say initially there was a bit of a mixed response. We got a little bit of a, from one, for example, very positive, relieved that they were at the table and that we were sharing our expertise and there to facilitate and support. One conceptually liked it, but ultimately seemed a little more comfortable with the traditional route. Another one needed a bit more information, well, a lot more information, engagement, and support to kind of get on board. And so some partners were more comfortable with the agile process than others. And there were some perceptions that we kind of had to knock down in terms of the ambiguity around the outcomes and a perception of a little bit of a longer timeline when we had short turnaround time, concerns around the objectivity of the process as well, although there were mechanisms to kind of build that into the process. And so I think what helped with that and how we kind of brought them in was to run these sessions, info sessions, have other departments share their success stories and kind of, again, walk them through that process and answer all of their questions, take it all in, and some very, very good questions that help strengthen the process and the outcomes, build up their confidence through that and trust over time, and let them see the results as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And as we saw people that had applied it, and you brought them in to talk to the different partners, there's a huge shift that happened. They were able to see it actually having been implemented end to end and hearing the results, hearing some of the challenges along the way and how they overcame it, to ultimately making a bigger impact had they not used the design thinking approach and the mindset around it as well too. As we're getting near the end, there's two questions that I definitely want to ask you. And the first one is, what would you recommend to teams starting to or looking to use the design thinking approach?
I'd say definitely get some coaching, training, and help. You cannot do it all on your own. You definitely need to bring in, whether when you're thinking of building out your teams or providing some sort of coaching and training from those who have done it before, whether it's other departments who are experiencing this, other people within your network, or professional coaches who have this kind of tried and true process that you can then take back and figure out, how can I practically apply this to my environment in a way that makes sense and is going to get the result that I'm looking for. So you don't have to go out there and try to build it all from scratch by yourself and reinvent the wheel. There is a lot of resources out there that can help walk you through that journey.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's a lot of resources that can help out and people that are available to coach or talk to that have implemented it before in the past and have had success with it too. And I think that's the thing that we hear the most often is it really helps having seen it being applied in similar environments or similar organizations and seeing the creativity that it has brought out in organizations and in teams, and then the impact, of course, as well too. And I know with our other clients and you as well, as the team moves and shifts, people move to other departments, other organizations, other teams, and that knowledge and information is moved with them as well. And so now in your new role, you're able to understand better how design thinking can fit in and the areas that it would fit in best into. And then also from a mindset perspective, I heard you say earlier too that it's shifted how you approach projects. When you think back on your experience in applying design thinking, what are the the one or two things or tools or parts of the methodology that you feel like had the most impact for you as you were working through your project?
It's a good question. I think one of the biggest ones for me, and maybe this is just my background, but it was the personas and mapping the client user journey. So from that, we kind of identified groups that we knew from the start. So whether it was, the agents or the supervisors or administrators, and then kind of deep dived on their roles and really understood how they use the services, how they plan to use it in the future, who are they as users, right? What does their day-to-day look like? And get in there at a really deep level. And I think that helped us not just in kind of building out these personas, lining them up to the client, not just as part of this exercise, but it was what was the value we were getting and what were the insights we were getting out of that exercise. And through that exercise, it really gave us that clear picture of our partner environment in a way that we had not seen before, of our users, of what their needs are, and where those pain points and bottlenecks and issues along their day-to-day. And it also helped us uncover unknown issues with the solution, where, for example, from our perspective, it looks like the technology is working, but teams are running manual workarounds due to limitations in the background. And we never would have discovered that had we not created this kind of, these facilitated workshops to bring these broader groups to the table that really helped us, change our perspectives again and develop those kind of practical and creative needs assessments for incorporation. So that I think was one of the biggest ones for me, was the personas. And then the second one would be that use casing and use cases and prototyping in preparation for the POC. Yeah. So where we took really, again, practical, tactical, 5 to 6 common real life partner use cases and usage scenarios with different consumption volume metrics, whether it's, high, medium, or low, or it's fluctuating throughout the year, and kind of played around and tested and tweaked to figure out, okay, how can we best test these capabilities? How does it work? The costs and costing drivers, how much is this going to cost us, right? And it really to enable that kind of test before you buy opportunity for clients to reduce that risk of running these kind of, time-consuming, tedious paper exercises without actually learning and being able to get hands-on, testing and experience with the solution and how it's going to deliver. So I think that was a big one as well, that gave us a new perspective on what designing with users in mind from the start meant, because the users were now a part of the process in a way that the traditional procurements did not accommodate. So that was a big one as well, was really digging in with the use cases and the prototyping with the partners.
I love that. And now I want to get into the questions that we have from our audience. And so the first one was, how do you deal with culture? And I think you touched a lot on it, but if you could summarize it a little bit in your own words.
So this is, and as someone that comes from private sector and has a combined, private public background, it is different. I think that, how do you deal with, it's such a big one. It's such a big one because you basically start small and grow is kind of what we did here with our group, right? We took these cross-functional teams with different experts in different areas of public cloud and brought them together and built out this cohesive team that was working together, and we all had the same common understanding, and everyone was comfortable taking risks and experimenting. And then you slowly start to grow in time. You need to bring in other internal stakeholders within the department. You need to engage your partners. You need to engage your vendors, and then just slowly build and build and build that out until it does shift slow, in your own sphere of influence, it does shift the culture. It's not going to happen overnight. But I think as people experience it and they realize the benefits of it and they see the outcomes of it, it becomes easier and easier. And if teams know that they have their management's got their back and they have their support, as they are experimenting and taking those risks, I think. And as long as those risks are, well documented and, escalated up as needed and handled properly through, government risk management, I think that is another way to kind of keep track of and reduce some of the unknowns or fears associated with taking risks in a risk-averse culture and kind of creating more of an innovation culture in government.
And it's funny, you and I were chatting a little bit before the webinar started, and you mentioned as you're reflecting back, there was it sounds like it takes a long time, and it does take a long time, but you guys were able to do it in a lot in a short period of time as well too. What do you attribute that that success to, being able to accomplish so much shift in the culture of the teams that you're in and working with as well?
So I'd say that cloud really offered an opportunity for us here to kind of bring together business and IT stakeholders and build out these cross-functional teams to execute quickly. And what I mean by that is we had, instead of having a smaller group and having to reach out, we brought everyone kind of to the table, all the key stakeholders to the table from the get-go. And then we had these sort of horizontally integrated management teams overseeing for consistency and standardization, with whether it's managers, project managers, agile primes, procurement groups, SMEs across different core functions. And I think that is what helped us. It was this kind of small and mighty team of core people who understood the mission and were driving, and then bringing those other people in earlier on. So there was less of a, I'll say, an internal, dare I say, sales job to get the other people on board that we needed in order to deliver. So I think we had that kind of one common overarching process. Everyone was kind of running in the same direction. And once we had kind of set up the teams and everyone knew what they were doing and got on the same page, then it was easy for those people who are also leaders in their own respective areas to run.
Yeah, that's great points. I love that. We have another question here, actually a couple questions together, and it's around the concept of failure within a government context. So perhaps connected to risk aversion and how to reframe that concept so that the need to iterate is not seen as going backwards, but it's part of the journey forwards. What do you see as the best way to shift the mindset with leadership to understand the need for quote unquote failure?
I think what it comes down to is leaders want to be able to see that you're kind of progressing in the right direction to drive a certain outcome by a specific timeline. They want to make sure that planning is well thought out, that the implementation is driving, well, and that all of these sort of issues and risks and are identified early on and mitigated and managed throughout that process. And so when you look at this sort of iterative process, you're building something early, almost draft mode. You're throwing it out into the world. You're getting people on board to try to adjust and contribute to that and kind of build and build and build on it to make it better. But you are failing quickly and you're adjusting quickly. And so you've got to kind of level set that process or that approach with giving senior management what they need as part of that. So whether that means putting in, maybe whether it's, key milestones leading towards the end goal, and then making sure that you have like proper, risk management processes in place so that you are identifying things and they are aware and information is running up and they're being fed what they need in order to report up their upline. I think that adds an additional level of comfort if they understand that process and you're taking the time to kind of walk them through that and how that works, even with some of the ambiguity as part of that process and not knowing exactly when or where. You can kind of work through that within the context of these milestones and of, the issues, risks, and still demonstrate progress holistically to give them what they need to make them comfortable going forward and supporting you as in that in those activities. So it's not easy, but that's something that I've kind of observed has helped in terms of adding that extra level of comfort for management and then all senior management, and then also being able to continue to operate in that way, even though there's a seeming disconnect between those two ways of operating.
Yeah, it would be amazing if we could just have everybody do that mind shift all at the same time and be a lot more open. And the term risk aversion trips me up sometimes because I don't think people realize how risky it is to stay doing the things.
So.
Yeah, exactly. And staying status quo is making a decision as well too. And I don't think many senior leaders appreciate that as much as they perhaps could, because at the end of the day, we're here to create value, whether it's for citizens, for our partners, for the people we're looking to serve. We want to create an impact. And a lot of the time, organizations come to us because they either want to solve things in a more creative way, especially complex challenges from a human-centered perspective, or they've hit a bit of a rut and things aren't working the way that they used to be working. And so those are really great jumping off points for allowing them to think differently and to be a little bit more quote unquote risk averse. And I think part of our job is to help them understand that they're actually reducing risk by tackling things this way. Like the iterative approach that you guys have done early on greatly reduced the risk of investing funds into a large project and then finding out later on that it might not be the right fit. And so, yeah, it's how senior leaders see risk and in this new approach as more de-risking rather than increasing risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the questions. Thank you, Stephanie, for joining us. I'm actually going to pass it over to Fernanda, who has a couple more closing remarks.
Thank you, Nilofer. Thank you, Stephanie. I always feel like 1 hour is not enough for so many things we can discuss here. So I would just like to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope you found our discussion insightful, and please feel free to connect with us if you still have questions and you want to talk. We're available. For those of you who must have joined late, you will receive a recording of the webinar, and we would love to hear your feedback. So as soon as you log off, you'll receive a survey, and we would love to have your answers and share your insights. Our next webinar is July 30. It's going to be super interesting, how to use design thinking in your daily activities, in your daily life. So I just shared the link for this, so you can already register. And yeah, for more information about deeper clarity and design thinking, feel free to explore our website. We have YouTube channel with lots of videos and our past webinars as well. We have a blog with lots of posts about design thinking. So, and you can always contact us. So thank you so much again for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Stephanie, for your time. Thank you, Nilofer. And we hope to see you in our next webinars. Have a great day.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Take care.